She asked about the will at 9:12 p.m. The plate shattered against the kitchen wall, missing her face by inches. Blood dripped from her nose onto the linoleum floor, the same floor where her real father once taught her to dance. Her mother stood frozen in the doorway, trembling. "You have no rights here," she spat, stepping closer. "You're not even part of this community anymore." That night changed everything. That night, I started keeping receipts, and 17 years of silence was about to end. My name is Rachel, and I grew up in the shadow of a woman I never called anything but Karen, the HOA president. Not because I was stubborn or disrespectful, though she certainly painted me that way to the entire neighborhood, but because some titles have to be earned, not assumed through a clipboard and a laminated badge. I was 17 when my mother brought her home, just 1 year after we buried my father. She was already wearing that smug, "I'm here to help" smile. I remember standing in our Portland suburb kitchen, the same one where Dad used to make Sunday pancakes, watching the stranger move through our space like she'd always owned the rule book. Karen was everything my father wasn't, rigid where Dad had been, warm calculating where Dad had been, generous silent where Dad had filled our home with laughter. "This is Karen," my mother had said, her voice too bright, too forced. "She's the new HOA president, and she's going to be managing everything for us now. Not, we're forming a partnership. Not, I'd like you to meet someone who cares." Just a flat declaration that our lives had been rearranged without my input, and the neighborhood covenants would now be enforced with an iron fist. I learned later they'd partnered at the HOA board meeting 3 days earlier. She hadn't even told me she was handing over the keys to our freedom. Karen worked in property management, something with HOA compliance that required power suits, early morning clipboard patrols, and the ability to quote paragraph 4.2 of the covenants like scripture. She had this way of taking up space, not physically, though she was tall enough, but energetically. When she entered a community meeting, the room felt smaller. When she spoke, which wasn't often, her words came out measured and cold, like she was calculating the exact fine for each syllable. She never called me by my name. To her, I was always the girl or your daughter when speaking to my mother. Never Rachel, never anything that acknowledged me as a person rather than an inconvenient fixture that came with the house and might violate the no visible toys after dusk rule. I threw myself into my studies, anything to avoid being home under her watchful eye. I'd inherited my father's aptitude for mathematics and logic, channeling it into computer science. While my classmates were at parties, I was in the library coding until my eyes burned, building databases that could track patterns the way Karen tracked every blade of grass. It wasn't just ambition driving me. It was survival. Every A on my transcript, every scholarship application, every line of code was another step toward freedom from the woman who fined my mother $50 for unauthorized holiday lights, left up one day too long. My mother changed after Karen moved into our lives. The woman who used to dance in the kitchen while cooking, who sang off-key to the radio, who stayed up late helping me with algebra, faded like an old photograph. In her place was someone quieter, someone who looked to Karen before speaking, who stopped inviting her sisters over for coffee, who wore long sleeves even in summer to hide the stress rashes from constant compliance checks. I asked her once during one of our rare moments alone if she was happy. We were folding laundry and Karen was out patrolling the neighborhood for violations. She paused, holding one of Karen's crisp white blouses, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face, doubt maybe, or regret. Then she smiled, that new practice smile, and said, "She takes care of us, Rachel. We should be grateful. Grateful as if we'd been destitute. As if my father hadn't left us the house, his life insurance, his pension, as if we'd needed saving from the horror of slightly tall grass." College was my escape route. I got into Oregon State with a partial scholarship supplemented by loans I knew I'd be paying off for years. Karen made it clear she wouldn't contribute a dime. "Not my responsibility," she'd said when my mother tentatively brought up tuition. "The girl wants to go. She can pay for it herself." The girl, always the girl. I came home less and less. First just weekends, then only holidays, then barely at all. I got internships that kept me busy summers. Took extra courses. Anything to build a life that didn't include walking on eggshells or pretending not to notice the way my mother flinched when Karen raised her voice about community standards. My mother and I spoke on the phone, surface conversations about whether my classes, never about the elephant in every room, how she'd chosen Karen's rulebook over everything else. After graduation, I landed a job at a financial firm in Portland, data engineering with a focus on fraud detection. The irony wasn't lost on me. I spent my days tracking suspicious patterns in numbers while ignoring the suspicious patterns in my own neighborhood. I got my own apartment, a tiny studio that felt like a palace because it was mine, no HOA covenants, no Karen. I built a life, friends, colleagues, a routine that didn't involve walking on eggshells or pretending not to notice the way my mother flinched when Karen raised her voice. I was 34, successful by any measure. When the call came, my mother had collapsed at the grocery store. Tests revealed advanced kidney disease, the kind that had been silently progressing for years, the kind that required dialysis, eventual transplant, constant care. "I'll hire a nurse," I told her when I visited the hospital. Karen sat in the corner, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. "No," my mother said, her voice smaller than I remembered. "I want to be home. I need family. Family after 17 years of whatever we'd become." She wanted family. I should have stayed away. Should have written checks for her care and kept my distance. But something in her eyes, fear maybe, or a plea she couldn't voice with Karen in the room, made me say yes. So I started coming by the house again, my childhood home that now felt like enemy territory, patrolled by one woman with a clipboard. I scheduled my visits around Karen's work hours at first, but as my mother's condition worsened, that became impossible. We existed in the same space like hostile nations, observing a ceasefire, civil only for her sake. It was during one of those visits, driving my mother home from dialysis, that Dr. Patel pulled me aside. "Has your mother made arrangements?" she asked gently. "Legal matters, power of attorney, her will with her condition. It's important to have everything in order." That night I watched my mother sleep in the living room recliner, hooked to her home dialysis machine, and realized how much I didn't know. What had happened to my father's life insurance, the house he'd loved so much, the small investments he'd always talked about leaving for my future. And why did Karen look at me sometimes like I was a problem she was waiting to solve with a violation notice? The question of the will haunted me for weeks after Dr. Patel's words. Every time I tried to broach the subject with my mother, she would deflect, her eyes darting toward the doorway, as if Karen might materialize from thin air with another fine. "We'll talk about it later, honey," she'd say. Or, "Karen handles all that." Or simply, "I'm too tired right now." But tired wasn't the right word for what I saw in her face. It was fear. I started noticing things I'd been too eager to ignore during my years away. The way she never made financial decisions without consulting Karen first. How she didn't even know the password to her own bank accounts. The stack of unopened mail that Karen would sweep away into her home office the moment she got back from patrol. The locked filing cabinet in what used to be my father's study, now plastered with HOA stickers. One afternoon, while Karen was out inspecting unauthorized bird feeders across the neighborhood, I found my mother crying silently in her bedroom. The dialysis had left her weak. But this was different. This was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deeper than physical pain. "Mom," I said, sitting on the edge of her bed, taking her cold hand in mine. "Talk to me. What's wrong?" She shook her head, lips pressed tight. "Is it about the will? About what happens after?" The crying intensified. She gripped my hand so hard her nails dug into my palm. "She won't let me," she whispered. "She says it's all taken care of." "But Rachel, the house." "What about the house? It was your father's." "He wanted—" She stopped abruptly, eyes wide as if she'd said too much. "I can't. Please don't ask me. It'll just make things worse." That night, I couldn't concentrate on the data models I'd brought home from work. My mind kept circling back to my mother's words. The house was my father's. Of course it was. They'd bought it together 5 years before I was born. I remembered him refinishing the hardwood floors, himself building the deck where we used to have barbecues, planting the oak trees that now towered over the property, all while Karen's predecessors had complained about non-compliant foliage. I did what I did best. I started digging into data. Property records were public information. It took me less than an hour to find the deed transfer. The house had been in my parents' names jointly. After my father died, it should have passed entirely to my mother. It had for about 4 months. Then, mysteriously, it had been transferred solely to Karen's name. For months, my mother had been grieving, vulnerable, possibly on anxiety medication, and somehow in that fog of loss she'd signed away the house my father had loved to the woman who now patrolled it like her personal kingdom. I dug deeper. Financial records were harder to access. But I had my ways. Patterns emerged. Joint accounts that became solo accounts, investment portfolios that mysteriously liquidated my father's life insurance payout substantial. I remembered my mother mentioning at the time seemingly evaporated into thin air to cover back HOA dues that had never existed. The late-night phone calls started making sense. I'd catch fragments when I visited trust documents, property assessments, estate valuations, always in Karen's clipped, businesslike tone, always ending abruptly when I entered the room. One evening, while helping my mother organize her medications, I asked our elderly neighbor Mrs. Patterson to keep her company while I ran to the pharmacy. Mrs. Patterson had lived next door for 30 years. She'd known my father. She'd watched me grow up. When I returned, I lingered on the porch, listening to their voices drift through the open window. "Never understood why you signed it all over so quickly," Mrs. Patterson was saying. "Tom would have wanted Rachel to have something. He told me once when he was building that deck that this house would be her inheritance. Every girl needs a foundation," he said. "You remember how he was?" I remember. My mother's voice was barely audible. But Karen said with the taxes and the maintenance and all the HOA violations piling up, it would be a burden on her. Better to keep it in her name, manage it properly. She knows about these things. Mrs. Patterson's tone was skeptical. "And the will? Karen has one." She showed me. "Everything goes to the surviving partner. She says it's cleaner that way, less complicated." And Rachel's silence. "Then Karen says she's successful. She doesn't need our help." I stepped away from the window, my stomach churning. Everything goes to the surviving partner. If my mother died first, Karen would get everything. The house my father built. The remnants of whatever financial assets remained. Everything. And what would happen to the will if Karen died first somehow? I doubted my mother's name appeared anywhere in her documents. That weekend I made an appointment with Robert Henley, the lawyer who had handled my father's estate 17 years ago. He was nearing retirement now, but his memory was sharp. I remember being surprised. He told me, adjusting his glasses as he pulled out old files. "Your mother came in alone to sign the transfer papers, said the new HOA president was managing everything, that it was easier for compliance purposes." I advised against it, but he shrugged. "She was adamant, or perhaps resigned is a better word. Do you have copies of the original will?" "My father's will." He nodded, sliding a folder across the desk. There it was in black and white. My father had left everything to my mother with clear instructions that upon her death the house and remaining assets should go to me. For Rachel's future, he'd written, "So she always has a home." "Your mother could contest the property transfer," Robert said carefully. "Especially if she signed under duress or without full understanding, but she would have to be willing to testify, and from what I remember of Ms. Karen, he didn't need to finish. We both knew my mother would never stand up to Karen. Not now. Maybe not ever." That night I found the envelope. I'd been helping my mother move some clothes from her dresser to a lower drawer she could reach more easily. There, tucked behind old photographs, was a white business envelope sealed with "Will. Do not open," written across it in Karen's harsh handwriting. I stared at it, my heart pounding. This wasn't my mother's will. I was sure of that. The handwriting alone told me Karen had prepared this. But why hide it? Why the secrecy? My mother was sleeping in her chair. The steady rhythm of the dialysis machine providing cover for my movements. Karen was in her office, door closed on another of her endless compliance calls. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Whatever was inside, Karen didn't want anyone to see it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I carried it down to the kitchen, needing better light, needing space to think. Should I open it? It wasn't addressed to me, but it was hidden in my mother's drawer, and she was too frightened to even discuss it. I was still holding it standing by the sink when I heard Karen's footsteps on the stairs. It was 9:12 p.m. I remember glancing at the microwave clock. Some part of my brain still cataloging data even as my body flooded with adrenaline. I couldn't make it back upstairs. I couldn't hide the envelope in time. So I did the only thing I could do. I turned to face her as she entered the kitchen, the envelope visible in my hands, and asked the question that would change everything. Karen, what exactly is in this will? The kitchen seemed to shrink as Karen stepped into it. Her face, usually controlled and expressionless, transformed into something I'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted rage. The kind that had been waiting years for an excuse to surface behind a smile and a citation pad. Put that down, her voice was low. Dangerous. Now. I held the envelope tighter. It was in Mom's drawer. She has a right to know what's in her own will. That's not hers. She moved closer and I could smell the coffee on her breath, the kind she drank while writing up fines. And you have no right to touch my things. Your things? This is about my mother's estate. About what happens to her. The plate came out of nowhere. She'd grabbed it from the drying rack and hurled it in one fluid motion. It shattered against the wall inches from my head. Ceramic shards scattering across the floor. I stood frozen, envelope still in my hand as my brain tried to process what had just happened. Karen, my mother's voice came from the doorway, weak and terrified. She clutched her four-pole, having somehow made it down the stairs. Please don't. Shut up, Patricia. She didn't even look at her. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. This is what happens when you don't discipline them. They grow up thinking they're entitled to everything. She lunged for the envelope. I tried to pull back, but she was faster, stronger. Her hand caught my wrist, twisting hard enough to make me cry out. The envelope fell, and as I bent instinctively to retrieve it, her other hand came up. The slap caught me across the face with enough force to snap my head sideways. I tasted copper as blood filled my mouth. My nose was bleeding. I could feel it dripping onto my shirt, onto the floor. The same floor where my father had taught me to dance when I was 7. You have no rights here. Karen's face was inches from mine now. Her grip on my wrist tightening. You're not my blood. You're nothing but a parasite who's been living off your mother's guilt for years. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard my mother sobbing. Karen, please. She didn't mean. She meant exactly what she did. She released my wrist with a shove that sent me stumbling into the counter. Coming here, snooping around, asking questions. You think I don't know what you're after? You think I'm stupid? I pressed my hand to my nose, trying to stem the bleeding. I think you're hiding something. I think you've been stealing from my mother since the day you took over this neighborhood. Another plate exploded, this one hitting the refrigerator. Get out, she roared. Get out of my house before I... Your house. I found my voice even as blood dripped between my fingers. This was my father's house. You stole it just like you stole everything else with your precious covenants. She picked up the envelope from where it had fallen, tearing it in half, then quarters, then smaller pieces that she threw in my face like confetti. There's your precious will. Now get out before I call the neighborhood watch and have you arrested for trespassing. Rachel, please. My mother was between us now, frail hands pushing weakly against Karen's chest. Just go. I'll be fine. Just go. I looked at her. Really looked at her. This woman who had chosen Karen's rule book over me, who had signed away my father's legacy, who stood by while she erased every trace of the man who'd loved us both. She was dying and she was still protecting her. Or maybe she was protecting me. I grabbed a dish towel, pressed it to my nose, and walked past them both. At the doorway, I turned back. Karen had her arm around my mother, now possessive and controlling, while she shook like a leaf against her. This isn't over, I said. Yes, it is. Karen's smile was cold. You come back here and I'll have you cited for every violation on the books. Your mother doesn't want you here. Tell her, Patricia. My mother's eyes met mine, and in them I saw 17 years of apologies, of regret, of fear. But what she said was, maybe it's best if you stay away for a while, Rachel, until things calm down. I drove to the emergency room in a haze of anger and pain. The triage nurse took one look at my face and fast-tracked me through as the doctor examined my nose, not broken thankfully, and documented my injuries. She asked the inevitable question. Do you want to file a police report? I thought about my mother, weak and dependent, trapped in that house with her. I thought about the torn envelope and what it might have contained. I thought about the property transfer, the missing money, the will that gave everything to the surviving partner. Not yet, I said. But I need you to document everything, every bruise, every cut. Can you do that? She nodded, understanding in her eyes. We'll take photographs too for your records. I spent the night in my apartment, ice pack on my face, laptop open in front of me. I couldn't save my mother if she didn't want to be saved. But I could make sure that when the time came, and we both knew that time was coming soon, Karen wouldn't profit from her years of manipulation and abuse hidden behind, for the good of the neighborhood, speeches. I started building my case file that night: medical records from the ER, the property transfer documents, my father's original will, bank statements showing the mysterious disappearance of assets funneled into HOA improvement funds that never improved anything. I thought about the security cameras I'd been meaning to install at the house to monitor my mother while I was at work. Suddenly they seemed like an even better idea. Karen thought she'd won. She'd literally destroyed the evidence, thrown me out of my childhood home, made my dying mother choose her over me. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd hit me, and in doing so she'd finally given me the weapon I needed to fight back. I touched my swollen face, gingerly thinking of my father. He'd been a gentle man who'd never raised a hand to anyone. But he'd also taught me to stand up for what was right, to protect what mattered, to never let bullies win, especially the ones who wore pastel blazers and quoted covenants like Holy Writ. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered to the empty room. I let her take everything you built. But I swear I'm going to get it back. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. I'm sorry, she didn't mean it. Please don't do anything rash. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Timeline of events. Systematic financial abuse of Patricia Morrison by HOA President Karen Williams. If Karen wanted war, she was going to get it. But this time I'd be the one choosing the weapons. And unlike her, I knew how to play the long game. The blood had dried on the dish towel I'd taken from the house. I sealed it in a plastic bag, another piece of evidence for my growing collection. Then I took 2 painkillers, set my alarm, and went to bed. Tomorrow I would begin the process of destroying the woman who'd stolen my father's legacy. But tonight I needed to rest. The fight ahead would require everything I had. As I drifted off to sleep, I could still taste blood in my mouth. Tasted like resolve. Tasted like justice delayed but not denied. Tasted like the beginning of the end for Karen. The bruises on my face had faded to a sickly yellow-green by the time I felt ready to execute the next phase of my plan. 2 weeks of careful preparation, of phone calls made during lunch breaks, of documents gathered and evidence compiled. My supervisor at work had noticed the injuries, of course, but I'd mumbled something about a car accident, and she'd had the grace not to push. The first person I went to see was James Morrison, no relation. Despite the shared last name, he was the attorney who'd handled my father's estate before Robert Henley. The one who'd overseen the original will, now in his 70s and semi-retired. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. I remember your father, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. Good man, meticulous about his paperwork. He came to me right after you were born. Wanted to make sure everything was properly structured for your future. What about the house specifically? I asked, sliding a copy of the property transfer across the table. James studied it, his expression darkening. This isn't right. The house was held in joint tenancy with right of survivorship. When your father passed, full ownership should have automatically transferred to your mother, but this, he tapped the document. This shows her voluntarily signing it over to Ms. Karen Williams just 4 months later to resolve pending HOA liens. Could she have been coerced? Proving coercion is difficult, especially after so many years, but he pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. I have a colleague who specializes in elder financial abuse. Your mother wasn't elderly when this happened, but the patterns are similar. Isolation, control, rapid transfer of assets. Let me make some calls. My next stop was the Portland Police Bureau, not to file a report not yet, but to understand my options. Detective Sarah Chun listened carefully as I laid out my concerns, occasionally taking notes. Without your mother's cooperation, a criminal case would be challenging, she said honestly. But document everything. If you can establish a pattern of financial exploitation and physical abuse, we might have something to work with. The assault on you is more straightforward. Do you want to pursue charges for that? Not yet, I said. I need to make sure my mother is safe first. She nodded, understanding. Be careful. Domestic situations can escalate quickly, especially when money and neighborhood power are involved. The private investigator James had recommended was a former FBI agent named Marcus Webb. We met in his sparse office where I laid out everything I knew and suspected. He listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in precise handwriting. The property transfer is interesting, he said finally. But what really catches my attention is the timing. For months after your father's death, that's often when insurance payouts are finalized. I'd like to look into what happened to that money. How much are we talking about? I asked. Based on standard policies from that era and your father's age and occupation, probably between $300,000 and $500,000. Not a fortune, but enough to motivate someone who finds neighbors for fun. My stomach churned. $500,000 meant for my mother's security and my future. Potentially stolen by a woman who couldn't even say my name without adding violation pending. Marcus agreed to dig deeper, starting with financial records and working his way through Karen's history. Women like this usually have patterns, he said. This might not be her first time. While Marcus investigated, I focused on my mother. Despite Karen's threats, I couldn't abandon her completely. I hired a home health aide through an agency, someone who could check on her during the days and report back to me. I told the agency it was because I traveled for work, not entirely a lie, since I was now spending considerable time building my case. The aide, a no-nonsense woman named Carla, called me after her first visit. Your mother's afraid, she said bluntly. Jumps every time she hears a car in the driveway, and that HOA lady of hers, she hovers. Doesn't like me being there, always asking questions about who hired me. Just tell her the insurance company arranged it, I suggested. Already did. She's checking into it though. You might want to have a backup story ready. I started recording everything. Every conversation with lawyers, investigators, health aides, every piece of paper that crossed my desk. My apartment began to look like a detective's evidence room with folders labeled by date and type. Financial records spread across my dining table, timelines taped to the walls. 3 weeks after the kitchen incident, Marcus called with his first report. Your HOA president has an interesting history, he said. 2 previous neighborhoods, both ended with the retirement of the president. Both times she inherited significant assets or control. My blood ran cold. Are you saying? I'm not saying anything that could be construed as accusation, Marcus interrupted carefully. I'm simply noting patterns. Both women were in poor health when they stepped down. Both had recently changed their deeds in her favor. Both died within 2 years of those changes. Oh my God! There's more. After your father's life insurance was paid out, there are significant cash deposits into accounts controlled solely by Karen. The amounts match up suspiciously well with what should have gone to your mother and what was written off as HOA improvement fees. I thought of my mother growing weaker by the day, dependent on dialysis, isolated from family and friends. How long did she have before she became another statistic in Karen's pattern? What about the will she destroyed? I asked. The one in the envelope. Based on my investigation, I believe that was a new will she'd prepared. Probably left everything to her, cutting you out entirely. The fact that she destroyed it so dramatically suggests she has another copy somewhere, likely in a safety deposit box, or with an attorney who doesn't ask too many questions. That evening I sat in my car outside my childhood home watching. The house looked the same from the outside. My father's oak trees now tall and strong. The deck he'd built still standing, but it felt like enemy territory now through the window. I could see my mother in her chair, the blue glow of the television washing over her face. Karen passed by occasionally, a dark shadow moving through rooms that had once been filled with light. I thought about the women who'd come before my mother. Had they sat in similar chairs growing weaker, more isolated, while Karen calculated their worth and waited? Had they realized the danger they were in before it was too late? My phone rang. "Carla, he fired me today," she said without preamble. "Told me not to come back. Said they didn't need help. Your mother tried to protest, but she shut her down hard." Another wall closing in. Another rope cut. Karen was isolating her completely now, removing any witnesses to whatever came next. "Thank you for trying," I said, feeling the weight of urgency pressing down on me. "Listen," Carla's voice dropped. "I managed to talk to your mother alone for a few minutes before I left. She slipped me something, said to give it to you if I saw you. It's a key. We met at a 24-hour diner." Carla slid a small brass key across the table. "She said you'd know what it was for. Said to be careful." I did know. It was the key to my father's filing cabinet. The one Karen had commandeered for her HOA office. The one that might contain the evidence I needed to stop her before my mother became another casualty in her calculated scheme. Now I just needed to find a way back into that house. And I needed to do it before Karen decided my mother had outlived her usefulness. The bruises on my face had healed. But the memory of that night remained sharp. Every time I touched the small scar where the plate shard had caught my cheek, I remembered her words. "You have no rights here. We'd see about that." The opportunity came sooner than expected. "Mrs. Patterson called me on a Thursday evening, whispering as if Karen might hear her from next door. Your mother collapsed again," she said. "The ambulance just left. That woman went with her, but she looked annoyed, like she was inconveniencing the neighborhood." I thanked her and hung up, my mind racing. If they were both at the hospital, the house would be empty. This might be my only chance to use the key my mother had risked so much to get to me. I drove past the hospital first, confirming Karen's SUV in the parking garage. Through the glass doors of the cardiac unit, I could see her in the waiting area, phone pressed to her ear, pacing good. Hospital bureaucracy would keep her tied up for at least a few hours. The house was dark when I arrived. I parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, grateful for the rain that kept the neighbors indoors. The key to the back door still worked. Apparently Karen hadn't bothered changing the locks after throwing me out. Her arrogance would be her downfall. My father's office, now Karen's, was exactly as I remembered it, except for the new laptop on the desk and the locked filing cabinet in the corner plastered with official HOA stickers. My hands shook as I inserted the small brass key. Turned smoothly. The top drawer was filled with financial documents, bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds. I photographed everything. My phone flash illuminating numbers that made my stomach turn. The life insurance payout, $475,000. Current location and account in Karen's name alone. My mother's retirement savings liquidated. The equity line of credit on the house maxed out to pay fictional community fines. The second drawer held correspondence letters from attorneys, real estate documents, and there my heart stopped, a folder labeled Patricia, current will. Inside was a will dated just 2 months ago. I scanned it quickly, my anger building with each line. Everything to Karen, not a mention of me, not a single acknowledgement that my mother had a daughter. The witnesses were names I didn't recognize, probably associates of Karen's who wouldn't ask questions about community benefit. But it was the third drawer that contained the smoking gun. A manila folder marked previous arrangements held documents I never expected to find. 2 death certificates, Miranda Williams and Dorothy Franklin, previous homeowners Karen had helped. Attached to each were deeds remarkably similar to the one she'd prepared for my mother. Everything transferred to Karen, for neighborhood preservation, no provisions for children, siblings, anyone else who might have a claim. Behind those insurance policies, each woman had been heavily insured with policies taken out within months of Karen's partnership. The payouts had been substantial. I photographed everything, my hands steady now despite the magnitude of what I was discovering. This wasn't just about my father's legacy anymore. This was about a pattern of predation that had claimed at least 2 lives and was threatening a third, all while Karen smiled at community barbecues and lectured about preserving property values. At the bottom of the drawer, wrapped in plastic, was another envelope. This one was labeled differently. Patricia, original. Inside was a will in my mother's handwriting dated just 6 months ago. In it she left the house to me along with whatever assets remained. To my daughter Rachel it read, "With love and apologies for the years I failed to protect what your father wanted you to have." So she had tried before the new will before her health deteriorated to the point where she couldn't fight back. She had tried to make things right. Karen must have discovered it. Forced her to sign the new one. The envelope I'd found in her dresser, the one she destroyed so dramatically, might have been this original will. She'd torn it up thinking it was the only copy, not knowing she'd given her a decoy. A car door slammed outside. My heart hammered as I peered through the blinds. Just a neighbor, but it reminded me I was on borrowed time. I quickly photographed the rest of the documents, then carefully returned everything to its exact position. Karen couldn't know I'd been here. As I was leaving, I noticed the calendar on her desk. Tomorrow's date was circled in red with a notation. Dr. Ashford, 2 p.m. Patricia, consultation. Dr. Ashford wasn't my mother's regular physician. A quick search on my phone revealed he was a psychiatrist specializing in competency evaluations. Karen was laying the groundwork to have my mother declared mentally incompetent. Once that happened, she'd have complete control over her medical decisions, her finances, everything. I drove home in a fury, uploaded all the photos to multiple cloud services, and emailed copies to Marcus James and my own attorney. Then I called Detective Chen's personal number. "I have evidence," I said without preamble. "Not just financial abuse. I think Karen Williams might be a serial predator." There was a pause. "That's a serious allegation. 2 previous homeowners, both retired. Within 2 years, both left everything to her, and newly changed deeds, insurance policies taken out just months before their deaths. And now she's trying to have my mother declared incompetent while she's fighting kidney failure. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning? Bring everything you have. I'll be there." I spent the rest of the night organizing my evidence, creating a comprehensive timeline that showed the pattern clearly. Miranda Williams, partnered, 2009, retired, 2011, cause of death listed as heart failure. Dorothy Franklin, partnered, 2014, retired, 2016, cause of death listed as complications from diabetes. Both women had been in their 60s. Both had pre-existing health conditions that took sudden turns for the worse. And now Patricia Morrison, partnered, 2008, 17 years of slow financial bleeding culminating in a rapid health decline. I called Marcus at dawn. "Can you find out more about how the previous homeowners died? Hospital records, attending physicians. Anything suspicious?" "Already on it," he said. Pulled some strings with contacts at the medical examiner's office. Both deaths were ruled natural, but there are irregularities. Both women had unexplained levels of certain medications in their systems. Nothing that would raise red flags individually, but together it's a pattern. Exactly. And here's something interesting. Karen was the one who found both women, called 911, performed CPR, the Grieving Partner Act. But in both cases, the women had been dead for hours before she discovered them. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Stop digging or your mother joins them sooner than planned." My blood ran cold. Karen knew somehow. She knew what I was doing. I forwarded the threat to Detective Chun and called the hospital. My mother was stable but sleeping. The nurse mentioned that Ms. Williams had left hours ago, saying she had board business to attend to. Business like threatening me, like preparing for tomorrow's competency evaluation, like planning her next move in a game where human lives were just entries in a ledger. I thought about my mother's original will hidden in that filing cabinet, her attempt to protect me, to honor my father's wishes despite years of manipulation and control. She'd been fighting this battle longer than I'd realized, in her own quiet way. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. I had the evidence. I had allies in law enforcement. I had the truth. What I didn't have was time. Every hour that passed was another hour Karen had to tighten her grip, to push my mother closer to becoming another statistic in her deadly portfolio. I looked at the key my mother had risked so much to get to me. Such a small thing. But it had unlocked so much more than a filing cabinet. It had unlocked the truth about the woman who'd invaded our lives, who'd stolen my father's legacy and threatened my mother's life. "Hold on, Mom," I whispered to the darkness. "I'm coming for her, and this time I have receipts." The police station at 7 a.m. was surprisingly busy. Detective Chun met me in a small conference room, joined by another detective and someone from the district attorney's office. I spread my evidence across the table methodically. Financial records, death certificates, insurance documents, the threatening text, and at the center my mother's original will. "This is substantial," the ADA said, studying the pattern I'd laid out. "But we need more to move forward with criminal charges. The previous deaths were ruled natural, and financial manipulation, while deplorable, requires the victim's cooperation to prosecute effectively." "My mother won't testify against her," I admitted. "She's terrified. And now she's trying to have her declared incompetent." Detective Chun leaned forward. "There might be another way. If we can prove she's an immediate threat to her life, we could intervene." "This competency evaluation. Do you know which doctor?" "Dr. Ashford today at 2 p.m. The other detective typed rapidly on his laptop. "Ashford's legitimate, but he's been disciplined before for questionable evaluations. Seems to have a pattern of finding incompetence in cases involving substantial estates. So Karen's using a corrupt doctor to steal my mother's remaining autonomy," I said flatly. "Appears so, but this gives us an angle." Detective Chun turned to the ADA. "If we can document this evaluation, prove it's fraudulent." My phone rang. The hospital. "Ms. Morrison, this is Dr. Patel. Your mother's asking for you. She's quite upset. She keeps saying she needs to tell you something before it's too late." I looked at the officers. "I have to go." "We'll come with you," Detective Chun said unofficially. "If Karen's there, we can't intervene without cause, but our presence might deter her from doing anything rash." The drive to the hospital felt endless. I'd spent weeks building my case, gathering evidence, preparing for a legal battle. But what if I was too late? What if Karen had already? My mother was awake when I arrived. Karen nowhere in sight. She looked frilier than ever, her skin almost translucent under the harsh hospital lights. When she saw me, tears immediately filled her eyes. "Rachel, honey, I'm so sorry about that night, about everything." "Mom, it's okay. I understand." "No, you don't." She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "I need to tell you something about the pills." My blood ran cold. "What pills?" "Karen, she's been giving me pills. Says they're vitamins for my strength." "But Rachel, they make me feel worse, confused, sick." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I think she's poisoning me." Detective Chun, who'd been standing near the door, stepped forward. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm Detective Sarah Chin. Can you tell me more about these pills?" My mother looked terrified. "She'll know. I told she always knows." "We can protect you," the detective assured her. "But we need your help. Do you have any of these pills with you?" "In my purse. She makes me carry them everywhere, watches me take them." I found the purse in the bedside cabinet. Inside was an unmarked pill bottle filled with large white capsules. Detective Chun carefully bagged it. "We'll have these tested immediately," she said. "Mrs. Morrison, has Karen given you anything else? Injections, other medications?" She helps with my insulin sometimes. Says I do it wrong, but I've been diabetic for 5 years. I know how to manage it." The pieces were falling into place. Insulin overdoses could mimic natural diabetic complications. Combined with whatever was in those pills. "Where is Karen now?" I asked. "She left for a meeting, said she'd be back by noon to take me to an appointment." The competency evaluation. If Dr. Ashford declared her incompetent, Karen would have complete control. Any testimony she gave could be dismissed as the ramblings of a confused old woman. Detective Chun made a decision. "Mrs. Morrison, we're going to post an officer here for your protection, and we need you to refuse that evaluation this afternoon." "I can't refuse. Karen said if I don't cooperate, she'll..." She stopped, fear clouding her eyes again. "She'll what, Mom?" "She said she'll make sure I never see you again." that she'll have you arrested for trespassing harassment. She has lawyers' connections. She said she could make you disappear from my life completely. The cruelty of it took my breath away, using my mother's love for me as a weapon against her, but it also revealed her desperation. Karen was escalating because she sensed the walls closing in. Dr. Patel returned with test results from my mother's recent blood work. There are some unusual findings, she said carefully. Medications in her system that weren't prescribed by any of her doctors. Sedatives primarily, but at levels that would definitely cause confusion and weakness. She's been drugging her, I said flatly. It appears so. We'll need to do more specific tests, but this combined with her testimony, Detective Chun was already on her phone. I need a rush on those pills for testing, and I want a warrant for Karen Williams' arrest on suspicion of attempted murder. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Officers arrived to guard my mother's room. The pills tested positive for a cocktail of sedatives and other drugs that, combined with her legitimate medications, were slowly shutting down her system. A judge signed the warrant. At 11:45, Karen walked into the hospital lobby confident and composed. She didn't see the plainclothes officers until they were beside her. Karen Williams, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Patricia Morrison. The look on her face was priceless shock, giving way to rage, then cold calculation. Even as they cuffed her, she was thinking planning. This is a mistake, she said calmly. My partner is mentally ill. She's been making wild accusations. I have documentation. Save it for your lawyer. Detective Chun cut her off. As they led her away, she turned to look at me. The mask finally slipped, completely revealing the predator beneath. You think you've won? Your mother's dying anyway and everything's in my name. You'll get nothing. We'll see about that, I said. But she was already being pushed into the police car, still shouting about lawyers and lawsuits and incompetent wives who didn't know what was good for the neighborhood. I returned to my mother's room to find her crying, but for the first time in years. They seemed like tears of relief. Is it over? She asked. This part is, I said, holding her hand. She's been arrested. They found evidence she was poisoning you. And Mom, we found evidence about her other homeowners too. She won't be coming back. She closed her eyes, seeming to age and grow younger simultaneously, as if the weight of years of fear was finally lifting. Your father would be proud of you. You fought when I couldn't. You fought too, Mom. The key you got to me, the original will you hid. You were fighting the only way you could. The house, she whispered. I wanted to give it to you the way your father wanted. Can we fix that? We'll fix everything, I promised. But first we focus on getting you better. No more of Karen's vitamins. No more fear. Just healing. She squeezed my hand weakly. I'm sorry it took so long. Sorry I let her. No more apologies, I said firmly. We look forward now, not back. As I sat with her, watching the real color return to her cheeks for the first time in months, I thought about patterns. Karen's pattern of preying on vulnerable homeowners. My pattern of running away instead of fighting. My mother's pattern of submission born from fear. All those patterns were broken now. Shattered like the plates Karen had thrown that night in the kitchen. In their place, we'd build something new, something stronger. 3 months after Karen's arrest, I stood in my childhood home organizing what I'd come to think of as the presentation. My mother was still recovering, staying with her sister in Seattle while she regained her strength. Karen remained in custody. Her bail set impossibly high after investigators uncovered more evidence linking her to her previous homeowners' deaths. But I wasn't satisfied with just criminal justice. I wanted complete vindication, and I wanted it to be public at the annual HOA meeting. The dining room table was covered with evidence carefully arranged in chronological order. Financial documents showing the systematic draining of accounts. Medical records revealing the slow poisoning. The original wills hidden away. Everything Karen had done in darkness I was about to bring into the light. You sure about this? Marcus asked, reviewing the guest list. Some of these people might not come. They'll come, I said confidently, curiosity if nothing else. I'd invited everyone who'd played a part knowingly or unknowingly in Karen's scheme, Mrs. Patterson from next door, who'd witnessed so much. Robert Henley, my father's original attorney, the notary who'd certified the suspicious property transfer. Dr. Ashford, whose office had received a very official-looking invitation to an estate planning seminar. Even some of Karen's board associates, who'd always wondered how she'd accumulated her wealth. Most importantly, I'd invited Thomas Reed, the prosecutor handling Karen's case. He didn't know it yet, but tonight he'd receive enough ammunition to ensure Karen never preyed on another vulnerable homeowner again. I told them all it was a community update to celebrate my mother's recovery. Only a few knew the real agenda. By 7 o'clock, they'd all arrived. I'd strategically placed cameras around the room, not hidden but discreet. Everything that happened tonight would be documented. Thank you all for coming. I began standing at the head of the table where my father once carved Thanksgiving turkeys. I know some of you are wondering why you're here. The truth is I need your help to right a terrible wrong. I saw Dr. Ashford shift uncomfortably, already sensing this wasn't what he'd expected. 17 years ago, my mother partnered with HOA President Karen Williams. What should have been a new chapter became a nightmare of manipulation, theft, and attempted murder. Gasps around the table. I had their attention now. I moved to the first display board. Yes, I'd made boards complete with timelines and flowcharts. My data engineering background had its uses. Let's start with the property transfer. I pointed to the highlighted documents. Mr. Coleman, you certified this transfer 4 months after my father's death. Do you remember the circumstances? The man paled. It was a long time ago. Let me refresh your memory. My mother came to your office alone. Despite this being a major financial decision, she seemed in your own notes distressed and confused. Yet you proceeded with the notarization. She had proper identification. The signature matched. I followed protocol. Did you? I pulled out another document. Because according to state law, notaries are required to refuse service if they suspect the signer is under duress or lacks capacity. Yet you noted her condition and proceeded anyway. The prosecutor, Thomas Reed, was taking notes, now his expression sharp with interest. I moved on to the financial records, walking them through the systematic liquidation of assets. Every account my father left was drained within 2 years. The money went into accounts controlled solely by Karen, funneled through HOA improvement funds that never improved anything. When I questioned her about this, she assaulted me. I displayed the photos from the hospital, my face bruised and bloody. Several guests looked away. But that's just our story, I continued. Let's talk about Miranda Williams and Dorothy Franklin. Dr. Ashford stood abruptly. I don't think I should. Sit down, doctor. My voice was steel. We're just getting to your part. I revealed the pattern. 2 homeowners, similar ages, similar vulnerabilities, similar outcomes, insurance policies, changed deeds, sudden deaths. And then there's you, Dr. Ashford. Karen had an appointment with you to have my mother declared incompetent. Interesting timing, considering she was being slowly poisoned with medications that would certainly affect her mental state. I never examined her, he protested. The appointment was cancelled when Ms. Williams was arrested. No, but you've performed similar evaluations before, haven't you? Always finding incompetence when large estates are involved. Always for the benefit of the person paying your fee. The room was dead silent now. I could feel the collective realizations settling over them. They'd all been pieces in Karen's game. Willing or unwitting accomplices to her schemes, hidden behind community standards. Now, I said, moving to the final board. Let's talk about evidence. I played the first recording, Karen on the phone discussing my mother's deteriorating condition with someone planning the competency evaluation while she was barely conscious in the next room. The audio was crystal clear. Then came the video from the hidden cameras I'd installed during my final visits. Karen crushing pills into my mother's food. Karen filling syringes with insulin doses far exceeding what she needed. Karen on the phone with her lawyer laughing about how the old lady will be gone soon just like the others. Mrs. Patterson was crying. Robert Henley looked murderous. Even the prosecutor seemed shaken by the casual cruelty in Karen's voice. But the real evidence, I said, Is this? I produced the original will my mother had hidden the one leaving everything to me. She tried to do the right thing even under her control. She fought to honor my father's wishes. Karen thought she destroyed this, but my mother was smarter than she knew. She gave her a decoy. I looked around the room meeting each person's eyes. You all played a part in this story. Some of you were deceived. Some looked the other way. Some actively participated. But tonight you have a chance to make it right. Thomas Reed spoke first. Ms. Morrison, this evidence, is it all properly documented? Every piece, I assured him. Chain of custody maintained. Originals in secure storage, multiple copies with different attorneys. I'll testify, Mrs. Patterson said suddenly, about what I saw, what I heard, all of it. As will I, Robert Henley added, about the suspicious nature of the property transfer and my concerns at the time. One by one they committed. Even the notary facing potential loss of his license agreed to provide a statement about the irregularities in the transaction. Dr. Ashford was the last to speak. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. He said she needed help, that the evaluation was for her own good. How many times have you said that? I asked quietly. How many elderly homeowners have lost their autonomy because you were willing to find what you were paid to find? He had no answer. As the evening wound down, I distributed packets to each guest, copies of relevant evidence, contact information for the prosecutor, documentation of their own involvement. For some, like Mrs. Patterson and Robert, it was information to help them testify. For others, like Dr. Ashford and the notary, it was evidence that could be used against them if they failed to cooperate. Karen Williams thought she could steal my father's legacy, I said in closing. She thought she could kill my mother, slowly, quietly adding her to her collection of victims. She thought I was powerless to stop her. I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. She thought wrong. As the guests filed out, Thomas Reed lingered. This is extraordinary work, he said. With this evidence and these witnesses, we're not just looking at attempted murder. We can pursue murder charges for the previous homeowners. This woman will never see freedom again. Good, I said simply. Mrs. Patterson hugged me at the door. Your father would be so proud, she whispered. You didn't just save your mother, you got justice for those other poor families too. After everyone left, I stood alone in the house my father built. Tomorrow the legal machinery would continue grinding. There would be trials, testimonies, media coverage. Karen's empire of theft and murder would crumble publicly, spectacularly. But tonight, in this moment, I'd already won. Not through violence or revenge, but through meticulous documentation, careful planning, and the power of truth dragged into the light. I thought of my mother, safe now with family who truly loved her. I thought of Miranda Williams and Dorothy Franklin, whose deaths would finally be properly investigated. I thought of my father, whose legacy would be restored. We did it, Dad, I whispered to the empty house. We stopped her. The oak trees outside rustled in the wind, and for just a moment I could swear I heard my father's voice in their whisper. I knew you would, sweetheart. I always knew you would. The meeting had been more successful than I dared hope. Word spread quickly through Portland's legal community about the explosive revelations. Within a week, the prosecutor's office had expanded their investigation and Karen's previous victims' cases were officially reopened. But I wasn't done yet. Standing in my apartment, I surveyed the war room I'd created. Every wall was covered with evidence, timelines, connections. At the center was a new board titled Final Phase, because putting Karen in prison wasn't enough. I wanted to dismantle everything she'd built on the bones of her victims. My phone rang. Marcus Webb, the private investigator. Found something interesting, he said without preamble. Karen has offshore accounts, Cayman Islands, primarily the money from your mother's accounts, the life insurance payouts from her previous homeowners. It's all there. How much? Conservative estimate? 3 million, maybe more. 3 million stolen from grieving families. 3 million that should have gone to futures to the children and relatives of her victims. Can we get it back? With the right legal pressure and her criminal conviction, yes, but it'll take time. Time we had. Karen wasn't going anywhere. The next morning I met with James Morrison, the estate attorney who'd been helping me. His office had assembled a team of forensic accountants and asset recovery specialists. "Your presentation the other night has created quite a stir," he said, sliding a stack of papers across his desk. "Dr. Ashford's license is under review. The notary Coleman has already agreed to a settlement. More importantly, 3 more families have come forward." My heart stopped. More victims. Potential victims. Homeowners who were engaged with Karen but broke it off when things felt wrong. One of them, Margaret Stone, said she'd already started the process: joint accounts, insurance policies, updating deeds. She got scared when Karen became too interested in her heart medication. Margaret Stone, another woman who'd almost become a statistic. I wrote down her information, adding her to my growing list of witnesses. "There's something else," James continued. "Karen's attorney wants to make a deal." I laughed, sharp and bitter. "A deal? She tried to kill my mother. She did kill at least 2 other homeowners. What could she possibly offer? Full confession, location of all hidden assets in exchange for life in prison instead of the death penalty. The death penalty. I hadn't even considered it as a possibility. But of course, multiple murders, premeditation, elderly victims in Oregon that could warrant capital punishment. "What do you think?" James asked. I thought about my mother, slowly healing but still jumping at shadows. I thought about Miranda Williams and Dorothy Franklin, whose families deserved closure. I thought about all the hidden money that could be returned to its rightful owners. "I think," I said slowly, "that Karen Williams is about to learn what it feels like to lose everything." The next phase required delicate choreography. Working with the prosecutor's office, we structured a deal that would give us maximum leverage. Karen would confess, but only after revealing every hidden asset, every offshore account, every property held under shell companies. Any omission would void the deal. I insisted on being present for her confession. Thomas Reed, the prosecutor, initially refused, but I'd earned enough credibility to push back. "These homeowners were silenced," I argued. "Their families deserve to have someone in that room who fought for them." 2 weeks later, I sat behind one-way glass watching Karen in an interrogation room. Orange jumpsuit, handcuffs, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked small, diminished, the predator reduced to prey. The prosecutor began with Miranda Williams. Karen's confession was clinical, emotionless. She'd met her at a neighborhood watch meeting. She'd been trolling for victims. She'd been mourning her first husband. The insulin overdoses had been easy. She said she was already diabetic, a little too much here and there. Who would question it? Dorothy Franklin had been even easier. Heart condition, multiple medications. She'd simply adjusted the doses, created interactions, let chemistry do the killing while she played the devoted partner. And Patricia Morrison, the prosecutor asked. For the first time, Karen showed emotion, annoyance. She was supposed to be simple, she said. Older, sick, isolated. But that daughter of hers kept interfering, asking questions, snooping around. She looked directly at the mirror as if she knew I was there. If she just stayed away, Patricia would have gone peacefully. "I'm not a cruel woman. I don't make them suffer." My hands clenched so hard my nails drew blood. Not cruel. She'd slowly poisoned 3 women, stolen their dignity along with their money. And she thought she wasn't cruel. The financial revelations came next. Account numbers, passwords, shell companies. The forensic accountants in the room typed furiously, tracking each lead in real time. 3 million had been conservative. The real total was closer to 5 million, scattered across a dozen accounts tied up in real estate and investments. "Why?" Thomas finally asked. "You had a successful career. Why kill for money?" Karen's smile was chilling. "Because I could. Because they were lonely and desperate and grateful for attention. Because the system made it easy. Do you know how simple it is to manipulate a grieving widow to become their whole world? Then take that world apart piece by piece." I left before I did something that would compromise the case. In the hallway, I nearly collided with a woman I didn't recognize. 60-ish, well-dressed, tears streaming down her face. "You're Rachel," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Sandra Williams, Miranda's daughter." "I'm so sorry," I began. But she cut me off. No, I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder when Mom partnered with her. Something felt wrong, but she seemed happy and she wiped her eyes. I was busy with my own life, my own family. I let her down. She was a predator, I said firmly. She knew exactly how to appear trustworthy. This isn't your fault. I know logically, I know, but hearing her confess so casually like she was just a transaction. She straightened, steel entering her voice. I want to help. Whatever you need for the civil suits for recovering the assets. Miranda's money should go to the Cancer Research Fund she always supported, not sit in her account. Over the following days, more family members emerged. Dorothy Franklin's nephew, who'd always wondered about his aunt's sudden death. Distant cousins, old friends, people who'd been pushed away during Karen's isolation campaigns. Each had pieces of the puzzle, stories of gradual changes, suspicious circumstances they dismissed at the time. We formed an unlikely alliance bound by shared loss and determination. The criminal case would handle punishment, but we would handle restitution. Every penny Karen had stolen would be tracked down and returned. The asset recovery was complex but satisfying. Properties were liquidated. Accounts were frozen, then drained. Investments were cashed out. The forensic accountants were brilliant, following money trails through offshore havens and shell companies like bloodhounds on a scent. Within 3 months, we'd recovered nearly everything. The funds were placed in a trust overseen by the court and distributed according to the original victim's wishes. Miranda's portion went to cancer research. Dorothy's funded scholarships for nursing students, and my mother's. I wanted to go to Rachel, she said when asked. We were in her new apartment, smaller than the house but filled with light and free of shadows. All of it. It's what your father would have wanted. Mom, no. This is your money. It was never about the money, she interrupted. Don't you see? It was about control, about taking away our choices, our voices. This is my choice, Rachel. Let me make it. The house, my father's house, was returned to her name after the property transfer was voided. She decided to sell it. Too many ghosts, she explained. Good and bad. I need somewhere fresh. I understood. The kitchen would always be the place where Karen had shown her true face. The office would always be where she'd planned her murders. Some spaces couldn't be reclaimed, only released. The day of Karen's sentencing, the courtroom was packed. Families of victims, reporters, curiosity seekers. I sat with my mother, holding her hand as the judge read the verdict. Life without parole on multiple counts of murder, consecutive sentences. Karen Williams would die in prison, alone and forgotten. As they led her away, she turned one last time. Our eyes met across the courtroom. I expected anger, defiance, maybe even threats. Instead, I saw what she truly was: a small, pathetic woman who'd built her life on the deaths of others and was now facing decades of nothingness. It's over, my mother whispered. Yes, I agreed. It's over. But standing there surrounded by other families who'd found justice because I'd refused to give up, I realized something else. It wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. 6 months after the sentencing, life had found a new rhythm. My mother was thriving in her apartment near her sister. Her health remarkably improved once Karen's poison was out of her system, both literally and figuratively. The dialysis continued, but her kidneys had stabilized. Her doctors were cautiously optimistic. I'd returned to my job at the financial firm, but with a new specialty: forensic analysis for elder abuse cases. My boss had been supportive throughout the ordeal. And when I proposed creating a division dedicated to catching financial predators, she'd greenlit it immediately. You have unique insight, she'd said. Use it. So I did. But first, there was one more thing I needed to do. The house, my father's house, had been on the market for months. Several offers had come in, but none felt right. I'd taken over managing the sale, wanting to ensure it went to someone who would appreciate what my father had built. That crisp October morning, I stood in the empty living room one last time. The estate sale had cleared out the furniture. The remnants of 3 lives lived within these walls. Sunlight streamed through windows. My mother had once cowered beside, afraid of her own shadow. Ms. Morrison, a voice from the doorway. Sorry to interrupt. I'm early for the viewing. I turned to see a young couple, probably early 30s, the woman heavily pregnant. They looked nervous but excited the way my parents must have looked when they first bought this place. "Please come in," I said. "I'm Rachel. I grew up here." As I showed them through the rooms, their enthusiasm was infectious. The man David was a carpenter like my father had been. He ran his hands over the custom woodwork appreciatively. "This is incredible craftsmanship," he said. "You don't see work like this anymore." "My dad built most of it himself," I told him. "Nights and weekends over the years." His wife Maria was drawn to the kitchen where everything had changed. But she didn't see the ghosts I did. She saw potential. "It's perfect for family dinners," she said, running her hand over the counter. "We're having twins. I can already picture high chairs right here where the morning light comes in. Twins. New life in a place that had seen too much death." "The deck needs some work," David noted, looking through the back windows. "My father built that too. He used to say a house needed good bones and outdoor space for the soul." "Smart man," David smiled. "We've been looking for months. Everything else felt like just a house. This feels like it could be home." As they explored upstairs, I made a decision. When they came back down, eyes bright with possibility, I named a price significantly lower than market value. "But the listing says," Maria started. "The listing is what the realtors think it's worth," I interrupted. "This is what I think it's worth to the right family." "Are you the right family?" David and Maria exchanged glances, having one of those wordless conversations that couples perfect over time. "We'll take care of it," David promised. "Honor what your father built. Then it's yours." The paperwork was handled quickly. 3 weeks later, I returned one final time for the closing. The young couple was there with their real estate agent, barely containing their excitement. As we signed the papers, Maria grabbed my hand. "We wanted to tell you we're naming the twins Thomas and Patricia." I froze. "How did you?" We looked up the history of the house public records. "We know what happened here." She squeezed my hand. "We want to honor the good memories, not the bad ones. This house deserves laughter again." Thomas and Patricia, my parents' names living on in the voices of children who would run through halls my father built, who would grow strong and safe in rooms that had seen too much sorrow. That's perfect." I managed, blinking back tears. After the closing, I drove to the cemetery where my father was buried. I hadn't been there since the trial. Hadn't felt ready to face him even in death. But now, with the October leaves falling around me, it felt like time. His headstone was simple, the way he would have wanted it. Thomas Morrison, beloved husband and father, builder of dreams. "Hey Dad," I said, settling onto the grass beside the stone. "I sold the house today to a carpenter and his wife. They're having twins. Going to name them after you and Mom." The wind rustled through the trees and I could almost hear his voice in it. "Tell me more, sweetheart." "Karen's in prison. Life sentence. She confessed to everything. Killing those women, stealing their money, trying to kill Mom. She's safe now, living with Aunt Carol, getting stronger every day." I traced his name carved in granite. "I'm sorry it took so long. Sorry I ran away instead of fighting. Sorry I let her," the words caught in my throat. But sitting there in the peaceful cemetery, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness, that wasn't mine to give or receive, but understanding. I'd been 21 when my father died, barely an adult, dealing with grief while my mother fell into the arms of a predator. Running had been survival. I came back, though. I continued. When it mattered, I came back. And Dad, we won. We got her. Every last piece of evidence, every hidden dollar, every terrible truth dragged into the light. Your house is free. Mom is free. Those other families finally have justice. A maple leaf drifted down, landing on the headstone, red and gold like the leaves he used to rake into piles for me to jump in when I was small. I smiled, remembering the couple who bought the house. They remind me of you and Mom when you were young, before everything went wrong. They're going to fill it with love and laughter and probably way too many toys. It's going to be what you always wanted it to be, a real home for a real family. I stayed until the sun began to sink low. telling him about the trial, about the families we'd helped, about my new work, catching other predators, about how Mom had started painting again, something she hadn't done since he died, about how Mrs. Patterson next door had testified with the fierce protectiveness of a woman defending her chosen family. I'm using your life insurance money, what we recovered from Karen, to start a foundation, I told him finally, for homeowners like Mom, for families like ours, early detection of financial abuse, legal support, safe transitions. We're calling it the Thomas Morrison Foundation for Homeowner Protection. The name had been my mother's idea. He always protected us, she'd said. Now his name will protect others. As I stood to leave, I touched the headstone one last time. I love you, Dad. Thank you for building something worth fighting for. Thank you for teaching me to be strong even when I forgot for a while. Walking back to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The ghosts were laid to rest. The predator caged. The house passed on to new dreams. And somewhere in Portland, my mother was painting sunsets while her sister made tea. Free to be herself for the first time in 17 years. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Webb. New case. Elderly woman in Beaverton. Suspicious HOA president. Changing deeds. You in? I typed back quickly. Send me the details. I'm on my way. Because this was my work, now my purpose. Every predator caught, every family protected, every stolen future recovered. It was all part of the legacy my father had unknowingly left. He'd built houses. I'd build shields. As I drove away from the cemetery, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Somewhere David and Maria were probably measuring rooms and planning nurseries in my childhood home. Somewhere Karen was staring at prison walls that would be her only view for decades to come. Somewhere my mother was finding herself again, one brushstroke at a time. And here I was driving toward another family who needed help. Another predator who needed stopping. The cycle of protection my father had started with his strong hands and loving heart continued through me, through the foundation, through every life we touched. The house on Oak Street would shelter new dreams. The Thomas Morrison Foundation would shelter the vulnerable. And I would keep fighting, keep building, keep protecting, not out of anger anymore, but out of love. Because that's what builders do. We create things that last, things that matter, things that protect what's precious. And there was nothing more precious than family. The one you're born into, the one you choose, and the one you save along the way. 1 year later, I stood before a packed conference room at the Portland Convention Center. The Thomas Morrison Foundation's first annual symposium on financial elder abuse and HOA predation had drawn prosecutors, social workers, healthcare providers, and families from across the Pacific Northwest. At the podium, I looked out at faces eager to learn, to fight, to protect. A year ago, I discovered my HOA president was slowly poisoning my mother while systematically stealing her assets. Today, she's serving life in prison for the murders of 3 women. But this isn't a story about one predator. It's about a system that makes their hunting easy and their victims invisible. I clicked to my first slide, statistics that still made my stomach turn. Financial exploitation of elderly Americans exceeded $3 billion annually. 1 in 5 older adults would experience some form of abuse. Most cases went unreported, undetected until it was too late. These predators are patient, I continued. They isolate their victims, gain control of finances, manipulate legal documents, and when the money runs out, I paused, letting the weight settle. Sometimes they accelerate the timeline. In the audience, I spotted several familiar faces. Sandra Williams, Miranda's daughter, now a fierce advocate who ran support groups for families of victims. Margaret Stone, the woman who'd escaped Karen before she could close her trap, volunteering as a peer counselor. Even Dr. Ashford was there, his license revoked. He'd become an unexpected ally, helping us understand how predators manipulated the competency evaluation system. My mother sat in the front row, healthy and radiant. The successful kidney transplant 6 months ago with her sister as the donor had given her a new lease on life. She wore one of her own paintings as a scarf, abstract swirls of color that spoke of freedom and renewal. The Thomas Morrison Foundation has 3 pillars, I explained, clicking through slides. Prevention through education, teaching families to recognize warning signs. Intervention through our rapid response team when someone calls our hotline. We act fast. And justice through our legal advocacy program ensuring predators face consequences and victims recover assets. Our first year's results were encouraging. 47 families helped. 12 predators prosecuted. Over 8 million in stolen assets recovered. Each number represented lives saved, futures restored. But we need your help, I said, addressing the room of professionals. Healthcare workers, you're often the first to notice unexplained injuries or sudden cognitive changes. Financial advisors, you see suspicious account activity. Neighbors and friends, you witness isolation happening in real time. We all have a role to play. After my presentation, the symposium continued with panels and workshops. I moved through the crowd, connecting people, sharing resources, building the network that would catch the next Karen before she could destroy another family. During lunch, Mrs. Patterson found me, now in her 80s but sharp as ever. She'd become our foundation's unofficial grandmother, sharing her story with anyone who'd listen about the importance of speaking up. Your father would be over the moon, she said, patting my hand. Building something that helps people, it's what he was all about. That evening we held our first fundraising gala at the Portland Art Museum. My mother had donated several paintings for auction, with proceeds supporting the foundation's free legal clinic. As I watched Portland's philanthropic community bid on her art, I marveled at the transformation. The woman who'd once been too frightened to speak now commanded attention and respect. Thomas Reed, the prosecutor who'd put Karen away, approached during cocktail hour. Thought you'd want to know, Karen's appeals have all been denied. She's also been charged in 2 additional cases from the 1990s. Seems our investigation inspired other jurisdictions to take a second look at suspicious deaths. 2 more women. How many victims had there been over the decades? We'd probably never know the full count, but at least Karen's hunting days were over forever. As the evening wound down, David and Maria Chun appeared. Yes, they'd legally changed their last name to honor the house's history and wanting to honor all the families who'd lived there. Maria carried one of the twins, little Thomas, while David held Patricia. The babies were 6 months old, chubby and bright-eyed. We wanted to support the foundation, David said, handing me a check. The house has been a blessing. It's only right we give back. I looked at the amount and tried to protest. It was too generous for a young family, but Maria shook her head. Every week someone drives by slowly taking pictures. Tourists coming to see the murder house, she said. But we know better. We know it's the house where Rachel Morrison fought back, where love won over greed. That's the story we'll tell our children. As they left, little Patricia reached for me with chubby fingers. I let her grab my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. A new generation growing up in my father's house, carrying forward names that could have been buried with their bearers. Karen had tried to erase my family's legacy. Instead, she'd multiplied it. The gala raised over $200,000 for the foundation, but more importantly, it connected people who needed help with those who could provide it. By evening's end, we'd identified 3 new cases requiring immediate intervention. Later that night, I returned to my apartment, exhausted but energized. My phone was full of messages, thank yous, offers to volunteer, requests for help. Each one represented a family that might be saved, a predator who might be stopped. I made myself tea and settled at my computer to review the day's cases. One caught my attention immediately. An 82-year-old man in Salem whose new HOA president was attempting to transfer his farm into her name. Classic predator behavior. I forwarded it to our rapid response team and made a note to follow up personally in the morning. My mother called as I was preparing for bed. I'm proud of you, sweetheart, she said simply. Your dad would be too. Are you happy? The same question I'd posed years ago while folding laundry in a house shadowed by fear. I am, she said, and I could hear the truth of it in her voice. For the first time in so long, I really am. I'm painting. I have my sister. I have you. And I have the knowledge that what we went through is helping others. That's better than happy. That's purposeful. Purpose. That's what this year had given us all. My mother found purpose in her art and advocacy. I found it in the foundation and the families we protected. Even the house on Oak Street had found new purpose, sheltering the Chin family and their twins. Karen had sought to destroy, to consume, to erase. But destruction, I'd learned, could be fertile ground. From the ashes of what she'd burned, we'd built something stronger, wider-reaching, more enduring than she could have imagined. I pulled up the Foundation's website, reviewing our resources one more time before bed. The 24-hour hotline number was prominently displayed, the warning signs, checklist, the legal resources guide, everything a family needed to recognize and respond to HOA predation. At the bottom of the page was a photo of my father. The one from his workbench where he was smiling over blueprints. Below it, our mission statement: building protection for every family. As I turned off my laptop, my phone buzzed with one last message. It was from Sandra Williams, Miranda's daughter. Helped another family today. Caught the warning signs early. They're safe now. Thank you for showing us how to fight back. I smiled, thinking of all the families sleeping safely tonight because we'd refused to let Karen win. All the predators who'd think twice knowing we were watching. All the futures preserved, dignities maintained, legacies protected. My father had built one house. Through the foundation bearing his name, we were building thousands of safe havens. Each case we took, each predator we stopped, each family we protected added another brick to the fortress we were constructing against those who would prey on the vulnerable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new predators, new families in crisis. But tonight, I allowed myself this moment of satisfaction. We'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to our family and transformed it into a shield for others. Karen was right about one thing during her confession. The system did make it easy for predators, but we were changing that system. One case at a time, one family at a time, one life at a time. In her prison cell, Karen had nothing but time to think about how thoroughly she'd been defeated. Not just caught, not just punished, but erased. Her legacy wasn't the money she'd stolen or the women she'd killed. Her legacy was the foundation that would spend decades preventing others like her from succeeding. She'd thought she was stealing my inheritance when she took my father's house and money. Instead, she'd given me something far more valuable, a mission, a purpose, a way to ensure my father's protective spirit lived on forever. As I drifted off to sleep, I heard my father's voice one last time, carried on the Portland rain pattering against my window. Well done, sweetheart. Now keep building. And I would, for every vulnerable elder, every concerned family member, every person who needed someone to stand between them and the predators circling in the shadows. Because that's what builders do. We create structures that last, structures that protect, structures that ensure no one else has to face the darkness alone. The Thomas Morrison Foundation wasn't just my father's legacy or my revenge against Karen. It was proof that love builds stronger than greed destroys. Always. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm curious, where are you tuning in from? Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about this story. If you found this narrative compelling, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who might need to hear it. Your support means everything. Until next time, stay vigilant and protect those you love.